Chris, good afternoon again.
Good afternoon.
You'll regret giving us your number when the next few weeks are over. But just explain a little about this. I mean, we know the Commons is elected, the Lords is unelected. But listening to Baroness Hayter for Labour a while ago in the Commons, she basically said to the Conservative peers who might try to block this vote and vote this down and just waste time, filibuster, come and have a go if you think you're hard enough. I can stay all night if I need to. But that's all very well, but there isn't much time, is there?
No, we've effectively originally got to get to at the end of next week to provide a steer, though the EU has also been talking about giving until the 22nd of May. But there is an imperative here, essentially, for the government to be given a steer by Parliament. That's what MPs want to do, by the European Council next Wednesday. So essentially what MPs Oliver Letwin and Yvette Cooper and Baroness Hayter would like to do is ensure that by the time the Prime Minister goes to Brussels next week, when she has to sort of seek a further extension, as she's intending to do, that effectively an Act of Parliament has been passed mandating the government to say this is the length of the extension that we want. And that's the purpose of this Cooper-Letwin bill. And that's why the Lords really want to sort of ram through the bill and make sure it's delivered by early next week.
And when there are rumours of Conservative peers with Downing Street's blessing intending to filibuster, just explain to people what that means.
So effectively, the Downing Street doesn't want its room for manoeuvre curtailed. They want to be able to go to Brussels and say, well, actually, there are different lengths of extension that we could seek. And also something which this bill doesn't provide for is what the EU's reaction is. The EU could turn around and say, yes, you can have a year-long extension or a 6-month-long extension, but actually we're going to attach some conditions to that. Michel Barnier has publicly said that he thinks that there are probably only 2 or 3 preconditions around accepting an extension from the EU's point of view, including around making sure that the UK has a second referendum or a general election. So we don't yet know what the EU is going to say.
Yeah, they've called it as a sort of a significant democratic event must take place for this. Yeah,
yes, exactly. And that's kind of what this bill doesn't allow for, really, in the sense that it's mandating the government to ask for an extension. It can't mandate the government in terms of saying what should actually happen if the EU comes back and attaches a precondition.
And all those... sorry, do finish. Your point.
All I was going to say on the filibustering point is that so that's why with Downing Street's blessing there were a group of around 100 Conservative peers who are in the House today, essentially trying to say, look, we don't want this bill passed. We're going to try and do all that we can by tabling lots of amendments, talking to them at great length, making sure that the bill doesn't progress, so that essentially it doesn't receive royal assent by next Wednesday. The Baroness Hayter this morning tabled a motion which effectively said they wanted to make sure that the bill completed its passage, in quotes, this day. The issue for them is that this day doesn't mean today. If Conservative peers keep tabling amendments and keep talking to them at great length, then the sitting could continue all through the weekend and into next week, if that actually...
And that could qualify as this day, could it?
Yes, I mean, the day sitting doesn't have to finish by midnight. It can go into the next day and so on and so forth. So a day's sitting this day could actually encompass the entire weekend if they wanted to. It's incredible. I mean, it would be incredibly rare for that to happen. There have probably been filibusters lasting a couple of days in the past. They are rare, but they take an incredible amount of organisation.
It's worth remembering how old some of the Lords are. Not all of them, but there's quite a lot of old people in that room. They won't want to sit there for 36 hours, will they? Have they really?
Yeah. I mean, so going back to previous bits of legislation, there have been times when peers have got the camp beds out and extra doctors are on hand to make sure. So yeah, absolutely. Undoubtedly, they'll be getting the chocolate out as well.
I think if Baroness Trumpington was still with us, she'd have just put 2 fingers up to me, wouldn't she? Talking about the age of the Lords, probably.
Yes, probably, and undoubtedly she would still have been in the House ready to vote according to which way her conscience dictated.
We've seen quite a few, certainly since these indicative votes began, we've seen quite a bit of our norms upended, haven't we, really, in Parliament? Now, it's not clearly, it is normal for a bill to come to the House of Lords. But given that the overarching conversation around Brexit is democracy, it would be extraordinary, wouldn't it, if the unelected House defeated the elected House's bill with very little time available between now and next Wednesday and change the course of Brexit?
Yes, I think that it would be, though there are always caveats here, because we are in extraordinary times where Parliament is effectively wresting control from government, the elected government, yet doing it in a way which leaves the elected government in place. There's been no
And when you say Parliament, do you include the House of Lords there? Because they're both houses of Parliament, aren't they?
Yeah, so yesterday this bill was passed through the House of Commons by a single vote, which shows just how close everything was. And indeed, one of the votes was a tied vote, which was the first time in 23 years that's happened. And indeed, I think only the third time in the last 50 or 60. So, clearly we're living in pretty unprecedented times. And this is MPs and now peers seeking to effectively pass a piece of legislation that the government doesn't want, and which is on the government's turf, so to speak, and limiting the government's freedom for manoeuvre.
But the House wants of Commons.
Yes, well, the House, a majority of the House of Commons by a single vote voted for third reading. So yes, but it's really squeaky tight in terms of the number of MPs in that majority. Now, in the Lords, it's much clearer cut, because there's a big majority, a pro-European majority in the House. So there's probably only 130 peers, most of them Conservative, who believe that either the government's room for manoeuvre shouldn't be constrained, or they are sort of Brexiteers and believe we should go out on no-deal terms. So in reality, the issue is not so much that the House doesn't want this to happen, because they will win every vote. The question, because they don't have this thing called programming, where they can effectively concertina and contract the number of hours for debate in the House of Lords into a short period of time, they don't have that. So the Lords effectively has to go through every single amendment, and every single speaker can talk to an amendment, and therefore they have to shut them up one by one. It's not like in the Commons where you sort of reach 5 o'clock and then suddenly the programming says that debate must stop and there must be a vote. In the Lords, you just keep going.
Well, interesting. Thank you. I'm sure they've got their camp beds out now. Chris White, thank you. Former Special Advisor to William Hague, Managing Director at Newington Communications.